Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hi, everybody. It's Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment. And Manny, I don't remember how many episodes I've been on here with you, but thank you so much for inviting me again. Always enjoy being here on your show, and I always enjoy watching your show because you give me a great perspective on what else is going on in the industry. And I think I've told you before, I live in such a Star Trek Adventures bubble that I have very little time to venture out beyond it to see like even what other games are being created or made or played or talked about or whatever. So I really appreciate your podcast and your YouTube channel to keep me kind of up to speed because when I'm working on the game late at night, I need half an hour to 45 minutes to decompress, and that's when I hit YouTube for my favorite channels. And you're one of the few on my subscribe list, so I
Oh,
appreciate everything that you're doing for the industry. So thank you.
thank you, thank you. I'm honored by your words. But yeah, I love having you on because we always talk about great books, and this is a really great time for Star Trek fans, especially if you're into role playing games, because we got tons of older stuff to watch and rewatch over and over again. But there's so much content coming out, and maybe if there's one series you don't like, there's three others you can check out and see if you like instead. We have if you love like you have Discovery, you got Picard, you got Lower Decks, you got Prodigy, and Stranger World. There's so much out there, so it's interesting. I'll talk to even like old fans that don't like anything new here and there. There's at least one series of the new stuff coming out that at least they're very passionate about. So that's exciting, at least at
Yeah,
the very least.
yeah.
And speaking of one of the new shows, so today we're going to talk about the Lower Decks Adventure Sourcebook with the Star Trek role-playing game from Modiphius. Um, that's very exciting because you know what's great. I love that this book is coming up because there's this meme where where for fantasy role-playing games, you might have seen around where they say you expect a game like Lord of the Rings, but you get more like Monty Python toward the end of your adventure. Um, and Star Trek doesn't really have that privilege. Usually when I talk to new people about, hey, like, you should really check out the Star Trek role-playing game, sometimes it's a little hesitancy because they think it's a very serious role-playing game, and they kind of like, oh, I don't know, can I play as myself? Can I joke around? They're not sure how much they could be themselves or someone else in a game. So having lower decks coming out, I think, will help break kind of that bubble. That thing like where it's like Star Trek games can only be serious. It can actually be a lot more fun, a lot more crazy if you want it to be.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree completely, Manny. I think there was a conversation happening on the Star Trek Adventures Facebook group at one point last week, or maybe even a couple weeks ago. I don't remember now. But someone was talking about Lower Decks and Monty Python, and I made the illusion. I was like, yeah, Lower Decks is really kind of the Monty Python of Star Trek, right? Because you got all the in jokes, you got all the memes, you got all the funny bits, and like where your prototypical D&D campaign might degenerate into Monty Python references, and I'm certainly guilty of it. We do Monty Python quotes all the time because it's kind of hard not to, right? It's almost just part of the experience. But now I've noticed with Lower Decks, it's like that's just kind of like seeped into the game consciousness a little bit in some places where a lot of fans when they heard the announcement they were like, oh yeah, like most of our games turn into Lower Decks games because that's just it's just how it happens. And that's totally cool, right? There's nothing wrong with that because it's totally like it totally makes sense to me that Star Trek is a little bit more serious sometimes because you got they're usually morality plays, or you got the Prime Directive, or you got big you know emotional serious topics to talk about because it's science fiction. And of course with science fiction you can explore the topics of the day, and it can be kind of safe because it's aliens dealing with racism or prejudice or sexism or whatever, and it's not us, right? So you got that little veneer of distance that you can put on to help explore the topics and stuff. But with Lower Decks, right, you can get self-referential and goofy and have fun with it and not be quite so serious. And I think Star Trek has done well in the past, like even before Lower Decks, having some silly moments, obviously, like with the Ferengi episodes and Trouble with Tribbles and Trials and Tribulations. Like there are some really funny episodes of Star Trek out there if you look for them. And that just gives you that perspective that Star Trek as a whole, intellectual property and franchise can do just about any genre of storytelling. And it just so happens that Lower Decks really focused in on the broad humor and even kind of like the funny, gross humor kind of stuff that like Rick and Morty were known for, and then of course Lower Decks has gone into, which I'll be honest, like the first couple episodes of the series, I was a little turned off because I was like, I didn't know what to expect because I didn't watch Rick and Morty. I didn't really know what I was getting into, and it was like, whoa, this is where they're going with this, and it took me a little while to warm up to it. And I think by episode 5 or 6, I think I was like, oh, I'm all in, because they are so, like they were being goofy and silly, but it was so clear that everybody involved in the series loved Star Trek, right? And there's so many references to original series and next gen and even the animated series, right? So it was like, oh yeah, they love this, they love the property, they love Star Trek, and they're dropping in all these Easter eggs and stuff, and that's just fun. And then the characters got better and better and better, and the writing got better and better as the series went on, and to where season 3 just finished 6 months ago or whatever, and I think it's great. But I'm digressing a bit, so I'll stop there and just say, yeah, I think Lower Decks is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is, and what's also great about Lower Decks, and we'll get to the book soon, everyone. but what's great about Lower Decks, I think, and this it's interesting. I was watching the show and I see the comedy and Mariner and Boimler and their banter back and forth, but it's like I'm looking behind everything and I'm seeing these like great sci-fi stories that I mean, there's a lot of jokes happening, but there's like certain episodes, some problem solving stuff. When I'm looking at, like, that could be a great like a one shot adventure in a role playing game, because they're really contained and wonderfully put together. It's kind of like Rick and Morty, because Rick and Morty, yeah, everyone knows it for its humor, but if you kind of like look past that a little bit and look at the sci-fi and the philosophy behind it, there's some deep stuff going on here. And the same thing with Lower Decks, which I really appreciate. But yeah, let's get to the book. I'm sure people are waiting for us to get to it. So let's talk first about what it's not. This is not a core rule book, a new core rule book. It's not how would you say it's very similar to the Discovery Venture campaign that came out last year?
Yeah, broadly speaking, I'd say it's like if you looked into the Discovery, the Star Trek Discovery, was it 2256, that campaign guide that came out, which had like a load of lore, a load of information, some space frames, the 3-part mini campaign, a dozen mission briefs, some new playable character species, that kind of stuff. Like that's the basic format for our campaign guides, and that's exactly the same kind of format we went with for the Lower Decks campaign guide, where we wanted it to be really focused on like that time period of Lower Decks, obviously, and we also wanted it to be focused on the Lower Decks crew experience, right? So like your junior officers, you're not the main bridge crew. You're more focused on the junior, your ensigns, lieutenant JGs, whatever, cadets fresh out of the academy, maybe, or your Lower Decks officers in different polities, right? So you could be Lower Decks Klingons, Lower Decks Pakleds, Lower Decks Ferengi, whatever. There was a couple episodes of Lower Decks that kind of focused on that Lower Decks experience for other policies, like that Vulcan ship that went around with was it Talin? I don't remember the character's name. But so you get we try to pack in all those different perspectives. So if someone's looking at the book thinking it's just going to be about the characters in the series, there's a lot more than that, because this is a 240-page book. It's a big, thick. It's going to, or at least when it's printed, it'll be a big, thick book, just like the Discovery. I think the Discovery book was 240 pages too, if I remember right. So it's going to be about the equivalent size, right? It's going to be a big, massive tome, and we just the writers and I, we just packed it as full as we could, full of interesting stuff related to the Lower Decks crew experience. What are your crew? What's the life of a lower decker like compared to a senior officer? What are the different things that you're going to be thinking about, right? Because the junior officer is going to be thinking about their career. Like, what kind of job experiences can I get or work on that will help me get to where I want to be? Maybe I want to be a chief engineer, or I want to be a captain, or I want to be the chief medical officer. Like, what kind of different career paths can I take? What kind of different jobs can I get involved in? And so we try to pack it full of that kind of stuff, where there's just different possibilities, and just a load of other stuff related to Starfleet and to ships and to all the other things. So hopefully people will see, it's just like the Discovery book, honestly, because the Discovery book, sure, it's about that period of time, but it's not focused on the Discovery and her crew specifically, right? We're trying to do a broader perspective of that time frame and pulling in elements of Enterprise and Discovery in the original series just to try to make it a cohesive whole. Because that's something that we get to do with RPGs, right? Is we get to take all the broad pieces of the franchise and try to stitch them together and add more detail because for role playing gamers like us, right, we need that detail to play our characters. We need to understand all that backstory that the TV shows tend to gloss over because they're focused on the characters in the story and what they're doing week after week. But like when you think about, okay, so how does money work in the Federation? Well, we need to write up some sort of description so that you understand it to help play your character. Otherwise, you're like, it could be kind of vague. So we try to go into a lot of detail on that in the book, which I think was cool. And what else to expect? There's a bunch of we've kind of embraced. Like I've been hesitant to do this, but we've kind of embraced the strategic use of random tables. Like a cool thing happens. Here's a random table to roll, and if you need an idea for bonding activities, right? So like in a couple of the episodes of Lower Decks, we saw some of the characters wanting to do bonding activities, right? So they needed to like the attendee and Mariner went on like a girls trip kind of thing. And so we came up with a D20 table of like, hey, you and your characters need some sort of bonding activity. Here's a random table, go roll on that, have fun, and do something different. Because I think Lower Decks, like the episodes, right, are so random sometimes with the things that happen to the characters that we really wanted to kind of inject a little bit of that potential into the game to where a game master or group of players, you want to use the random tables, by all means, go ahead, come up with some outlandish things that could happen to you or that you got to be responsible for or whatever, and then just see what happens. So I'm really curious to see what people think of those when they see them, because I think it'll add a fun little element to the game where a game master, they may have a plan for what they want to do, but maybe they're willing to go and make it a little bit random, and that might be kind of a fun way to run a session where you get your group together of lower deckers and you're like, I'm not sure what you're going to do tonight, so let's just roll on the table and see what happens. Okay, we're starting off and hey, you're on a star base, you're doing some zero-G maintenance or something, and then some crazy other thing will happen, and then you can go on from there. So hopefully we packed in a bunch of cool tools and just a bunch of fun stuff, and we'll see what happens.
So if I may ask, how do you, I'm trying to imagine what it's like to sit in your chair and organize this book. Is it difficult to balance the tone of the game from being too serious or too comedic? How do you balance all that? Do you have to get maybe new writers, or if I may ask, how did you get it to work?
Yeah, so except for the Lower Decks book, everything else we've done has been pretty straight, right? Pretty straightforward as far as the tone of Star Trek. If you've watched all the shows and the movies, you get the tone of Star Trek. It's pretty much squarely in the PG-13 realm, with some notable exceptions with the more recent series. But for the most part, if something would fly on television, it's fine for the game, right? We don't really get into extreme violence or horror or obviously we don't do any sexual trauma or rape or anything like that, because it's just not appropriate for the show for the most part. And so for Lower Decks, though, we knew that this was an opportunity to do something more broad and do to be intentionally funny. But at the same time, that's a danger, because humor is so subjective, and it's really hard to intentionally be funny and have it land right. And because humor is so subjective, what's funny to one person may not be funny at all to somebody else. And so we kind of had to really thread that needle to some extent. And so I had the writers and I said, look, this is an opportunity for us to get a little goofy and to be a little self-referential with both Star Trek Adventures and with Star Trek. And I also encourage if you can think of pop culture references from the late 80s, early 90s, fold them in somehow if you can, because that's exactly what the TV show is doing. Because that's Next Gen was out late 80s, early 90s, and they certainly kind of snuck in some pop culture references. And I was like, if there's a way to fit those in, do it. And then of course you've got Badgie, and Badgie's already an instant wild card of a character as it is. And so here's a fun little preview for folks. We have a whole bunch of sections in the book that are actually sidebars from Badgie's point of view. So Badgie is commenting on different aspects of the Star Trek universe in his particular voice, which is kind of like, very helpful and friendly in some cases, but it's also got that sinister dark side in other cases, right? So it's kind of a fun dichotomy because that character's got, kind of all over the place in terms of his potential of menace, right? Because there's like a couple of episodes where he's like, really, really quite brutal. And so we had some fun with that. And there's a lot of sidebars in here from like personnel, like personal logs. So we got all the main characters doing different personal logs that are reflecting on different things. And so the tone specifically for the Lower Decks book is markedly different from all of the other books in the Star Trek line. But I tried really hard to kind of like thread that needle to still have it be within the tone that we've been setting for the whole game, but still have it be Lower Decks, right? And I'll be honest with you, we sent the manuscript to Paramount, and they had more notes on this book than I think any other book that we've done, which on the one hand I was a little surprised about, but on the other hand I wasn't, because they are very, to their credit, they're very clear on what they want from a Lower Decks kind of product and merchandising and stuff. And so there were a few rewrites, but mostly in the spirit of making it funnier, making it even broader, like pushing us out of our kind of very straightforward Star Trek kind of tone, and to make it even goofier. So hopefully we hit the mark, but we'll leave it up to the fans to decide, of course. But yeah, for me personally, it was a balancing act. I think it was an opportunity to give the writers and the artists a little free reign, and just say, you can get a little, like, you got to keep it within Star Trek. Is like, the reviewers aren't going to ignore us, but they're still going to be looking at it. But we can get a little goofy. We can do some funny stuff, and we can do a little zany madcap stuff, and because that's exactly what the show is. And I think we would have done the show a discredit if we didn't try to emulate that feel, right? Because if we had done a straight book, but it was still Lower Decks, something wouldn't have felt right, So we tried to make that happen.
What about the art direction? I saw the cover. Is that cover the panel cover, and will the interior art reflect that style as well?
So the cover was kind of a special deal because when we were developing the book, I was chatting with Nathan Dowdell on the Modiphius chat, and he said, it'd be super awesome if somehow we could make the cover of the Lower Decks book be like emulate the core rule book, right, that we did. And I was like, well, of course, because if Lower Decks can be self-referential to Star Trek, we should totally be self-referential to ourselves. So let's see if we can make it happen. And then I talked to my art director, Ariel, and we threw some ideas back and forth. And then we found an artist that could do the Lower Decks, character style really well. And we were like, okay, well, take the background of the core rule book with the Tilakal archway and the fallen pillar with the blue veins of energy, and just drop in the Lower Decks characters. And it worked out great. I think it came out really well, and fans have noticed the very clear connection. I haven't actually gone. At some point I'll do a blog post. I'll put the two covers up side by side so people can see the obvious connection points between them. But all the art inside the book is all Lower Decks style. So everything you see on the show is reflected in the artwork. In fact, Paramount gave us permission to use screenshots as needed from the shows, which was great for us, obviously, because it didn't cost us anything to make that artwork. We were just except for the time involved to pull in the screen caps. But I mean, to date, we've been very careful not to use screenshots because we go with original art as opposed to still photography. But in the case of Lower Decks, right, it's an animated show, so it's artwork, so we can kind of get away with doing something a little bit different for this book. And so you'll see a large number of stills taken from the various episodes in strategic locations that are tied into the whatever subject we're talking about. But we also commissioned a whole bunch of original art, and my art director, again, Ariel, he did a great job sourcing artists who could do the Lower Decks style of characters and backgrounds and situations and stuff. And I don't want to say that you can look at our art and the show art and like find them not indistinguishable, but Paramount liked the art, they approved all of it, so they were happy with it for and that's fine by me, like that's good enough for me. So but yeah, the entire book is all Lower Decks kind of style animation, so we did get away from the CGI and like the painted artwork that we normally do. as a kind of a special deal for this book, because I think it really lent itself to do the lower decks look and feel for the lower decks book, and you'll see that even in the interior design too. We took our Lcars, our TNG Lcars look and feel, and we changed that. We changed the color palette, and we made sure it was predominantly on a white background instead of a black background, because obviously over the last 7 years, a lot of folks have complained that the black background looks great on screen, but it's super hard to read in print. And so we've kind of shifted away from dark backgrounds for the most part. There's a couple of strategic places in the book where it made sense to use a black background just for effect, but the vast majority of the book is in a light colored background, which I think just makes it readable. And again, the color palette, we updated the color palette to match lower decks more than Next Generation, and hopefully folks dig it. I think it'll be a fun read if nothing else.
Do you plan to have any player options, like things like new technology or new alien races you can play?
Yep, we have. So this book has 8 new playable character species, and we do have a chapter in there of new gear, new technology, new stuff to play with. All of which was pulled right out of the show. Like there's a lot of episodes that introduce new technology, new stuff. Now, of course, equipment in Star Trek Adventures isn't super detailed in terms of statistics anyway, because it's for the most part it's a trade or it's an advantage or something. But there's some cool stuff that we dropped in, some funny stuff, obviously based on the shows. But I think fans will be excited about the 8 playable character species that we added to this, specifically oriented to lower decks. There's a couple in there that fans have been asking about for a couple of years now, once Lower Decks came out. And this was the right book to finally fit them into. Like we've been sitting on a couple of these for a while, just like what product do we put these into, what makes sense. And then it just worked out that the Lower Decks book came up on the schedule, and we're like, let's do it. And then I looked at it and looked at the stuff we had available, and I was like, yep, this totally makes sense to put in here. So as I was building out the outline, I told the writers, here's where we're going to put the pack leads. Here's where we're going to put the exocomps, and then the other ones as well. But it made sense to put them here as opposed to other books where we might have put them. So hopefully fans will dig on the new options available to them.
So if I may ask, so the previous campaign books that you put out, the Shackleton Expanse and even Discovery, you have done a great job incorporating the Klingon core rulebook. Involved in these adventures, so you can still use them for these, even though they may not be heavily dealing with Klingon specifically. Now, for this one, was that difficult to try to put these 2 books, even though they're not different, but I don't know. Personally, I think for me, a comedic Klingon adventure would be a fantastic idea. For some reason, I imagine it's like a British, like dry wit sitcom. I don't know why I imagined that, but was that a challenge for you?
To add Klingons to this? No, not at all. I think fortunately, just by watching the show, there was a couple episodes that did feature Klingons in the lower decks or showed. There's that one episode of Wedge Douche. And I may have butchered that pronunciation, so apologies, folks. Even though I'm wearing the Klingon hat tonight. We did get to see the Klingon lower decks perspective right near the end of the second season, I think.
Yeah.
And so
fantastic episode.
Yeah, absolutely, a fantastic episode. I loved it. But that episode, we were able to draw inspiration from that episode and add in some Klingon elements to this book, so that if you do want to play the lower decks experience from the Klingon perspective, or the Ferengi perspective, or the Vulcan experience, or whatever. We added in stuff into the book to make sure that you had the opportunity to do that, as well as a couple sidebars in the same Klingon sidebar kind of style with the red lining. If you're familiar with the Klingon core book, with the way we formatted those sidebars, it's a little thing, it's subtle, but we did that in the Shackleton book too, where we had Federation sidebars in the traditional Lcars design, and then we had a few Klingon sidebars in that kind of like red look and feel with the different type of bar typography that they use on their computer screens. So you'll see some Klingon stuff in the lower decks book, probably not as much as you would have seen in like the Discovery book, for obvious reasons. I mean, Discovery season 1, season 2, like a huge chunk of that is Klingons. because that it was such a prominent part of the first season and a half. So there's some Klingon stuff in here for sure. I don't know that, I'm sure some Klingon predominantly focused players might be disappointed that there isn't more. But I think the advice in the book about playing lower deckers is pretty easily transferable, whether you're Starfleet or Klingon or Ferengi or Packlet or whatever. Like the same philosophies probably carry over from polity to polity, even though your Klingons get promoted in different ways or have the potential to get promoted in different ways. I think some of the same core components of what makes a lower decker are easily transferable. So I think there's still enough material in the book that Klingons can get use out of it. Everybody else can get use out of it too. So hopefully people will appreciate it.
You sort of answered this already in a previous question, but the adventures themselves, do you we're not gonna spoil anything, and actually I prefer not to know. They're gonna really enjoy what Modiphius is gonna put together for stories. But will this be like do you see this as like a season, almost like a season worth of adventures, or do you see them very like very like they could be detached, so they could be like almost like a bunch of one shots put together? Like, how do you see these adventures?
Yeah. So the Lower Decks campaign guide contains 12 mission briefs, right, which are always the vast majority of the mission briefs that we've released to date are meant to be standalone episodes, right? They all tell a discrete story, even though a game master and a group of players can easily add in elements to string them together one after another into a full-blown campaign if they want to. They tend not to relate to each other directly, although it's certainly easy to do. And of course, in the Shackleton book, a lot of them relate to each other because it's all telling the same kind of telecall type of storyline. But in the Lower Decks book, the 12 mission briefs were all intended to be kind of like standalone one-off episodes, like you would see on Next Gen or Lower Decks, like where they have the adventure of the week and then they go on to another thing. The intention, of course, with mission briefs is always that the game master and the players are bringing their characters into it. They'll be interweaving subplots and continuing stories and continuing pieces. And that's what the connective tissue will be, right? Even though the story is a one-off, there's still connective tissue connecting all the stories together by virtue of the characters in the ship. But no, the 12 mission briefs are meant to be standalones. So you can run them as like a one-off. If you need a one-night filler, you can do that. If you need a convention game, you can do that. And then the mini campaign in the book, all three of those missions were also written to be standalone, even though there's a little bit of connective tissue between the three of them that you could string them together into a campaign. They were all kind of written to be like, okay, this happens, and you don't necessarily have to have played the other two, or you don't have to play the other two to get the whole story. They're all related, but they're all Lower Decks focused. So we wanted to get away from the senior staff might win the day, but it's the adventures are focused on the Lower Deckers and what they're doing, because of course we got to give the player characters an opportunity to have some agency and to do something, even if they are not the ones with the final decision, like the captain. Like we see this on the show all the time, right? Like Mariner and Boimler and Rutherford and Tennant, they always get into all kind of shenanigans, even if they're not directly responsible for whatever the captain or Ransom are doing. They're the ones who are making the big decisions, but more often than not, it's the Lower Deckers, saving their butts and figuring out the story from there. So hopefully, so that's 15 potential standalone adventures, standalone missions that this book contains. So that's a season, right? That's actually a season and a half of Lower Decks. Like if each season's 10 episodes, right? So we're giving you a season and a half of Lower Decks, and we have a mission brief pack coming out here pretty soon with another 10 mission briefs. That'll be 23. The standalone just came out. That's 24. So you'll have 2.5 seasons worth of Lower Decks stuff that you can use right away once that book comes out. Hopefully that'll excite some folks, because we do try to give you lots of content, right? So we're just churning this stuff out. Well, not churn's a bad word. We are producing a lot of stuff and making it available. So hopefully people are enjoying the stream of stuff.
I'm going to ask you a general question about because usually at the end of your books, there's usually a collection of NPCs,
Yep.
possible villains, and I guess you could consider ships NPCs. Some ships have a personality to themselves.
Yeah.
What without without asking you to spoil anything, what can you share about the process of that?
Well, so this is where I got to challenge my writers a little bit and have some fun. So in the outline, right, I was writing the outline and I was like, okay, so chapter 7 is going to be the starships chapter, chapter 8 is going to be the NPCs chapter, and then chapter 9 is the campaign. And so Aaron Pollier wrote most of the starships, and I was like, okay, we want these 7 space frames in the for sure. Like, just him and I and the other writers just talking back and forth, like what space frames do we want to include in this that we were not able to include in Utopia Planitia, and then what other ships in that we've seen in the series so far are we going to want to drop in here if we have the space for it. And of course, there's a like Lower Decks always amazes me in that the episodes are only like 22 minutes long, right? But they pack so much stuff into that 22 minutes, like not just story and character, but like stuff, like whether it's Easter eggs to the original series, animated series, next gen, whatever. But they throw starships at you, they throw characters at you, they throw monsters at you, they throw all kinds of stuff. So like every episode is just packed full of stuff, right? And like I rewatched the whole series 2 or 3 times while I was just working on the outline, trying to pull out, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And then like the writers that I commissioned to work on the book, they were doing it too, right? So like collectively we had this outline that was just growing and growing and growing of all these different characters and creatures and ships that we could drop in. And then once we had this ridiculously huge list of stuff, that's when I started going in and like, okay, let's start paring this down a little bit because we just don't have 300 pages, 400 pages. Like we could make this thing a 500-page book if we wanted to, but no one would buy it because it would be too expensive. So we pared it down, and I think we've got 6 new space frames plus a repeat, because I thought the Luna class, because it was so prominent in Lower Decks, I thought it was worth reprinting that just in the off chance that someone hadn't bought the command source book or hadn't bought Utopia Planitia, right? I was thinking about the new people coming into the game who might buy a core rule book or the rules digest or whatever, and would only want to do Lower Decks. So if they bought just the core book and Lower Decks, they weren't duplicating content, right? They weren't duplicating effort. Of course, the people that buy everything, there'll be a little bit of duplication, and I apologize for that. But the Luna class in particular, because we saw the Titan in the finale of season 1, and it played such a big role in that finale, and then we saw it a little bit again in season 2, I thought this would absolutely be appropriate to reprint the Luna in here, along with the other 6 new space frames. And then we've got like another 20 or 25 spaceships that have been statted up. They're not space frames, but there's just a lot of ships that appear in the series that we were like, oh, we definitely got to include that. So especially the pack leads, right? We got several pack lead variations in there so that players can throw that at or game masters can throw it at their players. A bunch of other ships, and then with the non-player characters, right? Because Lower Decks is so self-referential to the franchise, right? So they pull in a lot of characters and species from the original series, animated series, and next gen, right? There's a lot of references back and forth. Plus, they're creating new stuff. I wanted to get as broad of a collection as possible of Lower Decks species, Lower Decks characters, plus the other characters that they've been pulling in. So I think we ended up with like 40 or 50 different NPCs at varying levels of capability. So it's just a lot of stuff, and like I probably could have cut more, but I just didn't want to, because especially because we had the ability to pull in screenshots for a lot of these characters. I was like, well, because that was always the sticking point for me with the earlier books, is that we had a very specific art budget, and you can't, like, it sucks to be a player and like, oh, I want to play this species, but I don't know what they look like because they couldn't afford to put art in for it, right? And now I have to go to the internet and try to find the art for this species. But so we were able to put more art into this book just by virtue of the fact that we had access to 20 hours of screenshots, right? Why not use it, right? If we have access to it, let's use it. So you'll see a lot of NPCs in the book that actually have a little screenshot or a little face, or image of it or something, so that you can better visualize what the character is, what the species is, etc. In addition to the creatures, right? They're like Lower Decks does a great job of adding weird creatures into the episodes, whether it's the spider cows or the dog or just all kinds of other stuff. And we're like, yeah, let's totally drop all that. Like, let's write up as many of those staff blocks as we can and see how many we can cram in here. And we just made it work. And then the graphic designer Chris Webb over at Modiphius, he did a great job of sourcing a lot of art, and he was able to pull a lot of it out of the screenshots and like isolate it so that it looked good within the layout. So yeah, there's just a huge amount of non-player characters, non-player character ships, space frames, and new creatures for players and game masters just to enjoy, because there's just so much. Like if you look at even just the first 2 seasons of Lower Decks, even though those 20 episodes are only, what, like 10 hours total of Star Trek, they packed in a ton of stuff in those 10 hours. And we just tried to do the best we could to get the most important, most memorable stuff into the book. I'm sure we left some stuff out, but we tried to hit the absolutely key high points, and hopefully fans will dig on it, because, like I said, we just packed. We try to give game masters and players just as many tools as possible to play with, and hopefully they'll dig what we've got in there.
So we're having this interview in April 2023.
Yep.
When will the book be available for purchase?
Yeah, so we're expecting, like, right now it's at the printer. So I mean, as of what is it, April 16th? It is now at the printer in Lithuania, and they are merrily going about their way, printing the interiors and the covers and mounting the covers and all the stuff that they have to do. And once that's done printing, they'll ship it over to the United Kingdom, and then from the United Kingdom, it'll get on a boat and head over to America. So we're right now, barring any surprises in the world, COVID, knock on wood, COVID, distribution, whatever, all that crap that we've had to deal with over the last 3 years that we have literally no control over, right? I mean, nobody does. Like, shipping around the world's always been screwy, but things have gotten better in my understanding. So right now, the plan is to put this thing on pre-order in June. And as with all of our Star Trek books, when you pre-order it, you'll get the PDF right away, because that's always the intention. Is I don't want to make people pre-order something and not have anything to show for it. Like, I want to give them the goods just as soon as possible, because we're so excited about this book, and we've worked so hard on this book, that we want to get it into your hands as soon as possible and start playing with it. So the plan is to put it on pre-order in June, and then the intention, again, knock on wood, the intention is for this thing to release globally at Gen Con in August of 23, and hopefully that'll all work out. We'll just have to see how it plans, but that's the plan anyway. But if we miss Gen Con for whatever reason, it should definitely be out by August. Late mid-August, September, whatever. Like, I know that independent of Modiphius, there is a distribution issue in America, not just for Modiphius, but just in general, with books and products getting into the distributors and then getting out to the stores. I don't know what the deal is, but whoever can figure out that distribution issue will make a load of money and make a lot of game companies happy. But so I don't know what the deal is there, but hopefully so anyway, long story short, pre-order is expected in June, and then the book should be out in August. So that's the intention.
Is there anything about the book that I haven't asked about that you wanted to share?
I guess this is it's not really a spoiler, but it's a preview. One of the adventures is very reminiscent of one of the episodes of Lower Decks, and people might read the adventure and say, oh, well, they were just riffing off this episode. And I want to say now, and of course, this will be in hindsight, but it was totally not intentional, because we wrote that adventure before the episode came out, right? So just by virtue of the production timeline, we were mostly done with this book when season 3 came out. We were able to do some very last minute tweaking to add in some elements of season 3, just to make sure that it was a little bit more comprehensive. But there's one particular episode of season 3 that this one of the adventures in the book is very reminiscent of, and I think some people will be a little confused about that, but hopefully you'll dig it, because it's a really fun adventure, and I think fans will like it, because I know that the fan response to the actual episode that was in season 3 was really well received. So I know that's kind of vague, but just look forward to that. Just know that one of the episodes is very gamer friendly. Let's leave it at that.
Well, that
And
must have been a fascinating coincidence.
it
That,
was, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it was a little bit of a surprise, but then on the other hand, it was like, oh no, it totally makes sense that they would have done that in Lower Decks. And Michael McMahon, the creator of Lower Decks, he was gracious enough to write the foreword to the book for us. So his foreword is in the book, and he writes at length about his experiences playing Dungeons and Dragons. And having read that foreword and then seeing the episode on Lower, no, I've given it away. So I'm watching the episode of season 3 with them playing a role playing game with Martok as the virtual game master. Like having read that, I was like, oh shoot, we kind of like we went there with one of the episodes or one of the adventures, but it felt kind of validating in a weird sort of way that we did that with that adventure, and then we actually saw it on the screen. We're like, okay, we're totally on the right wavelength now. We know what we're we know what we're doing. We know what they're doing. So that was kind of fun. Again, just look forward to the random tables in the book that are really meant to be fun and to help spark ideas and to spark kind of ridiculous situations at the table. We have there's a new technobabble generator in there, kind of where if you want a senior officer to give one of your junior officers some menial task to go do, like scrub the biofilters in the holodeck or something, like we created a couple of different flow charts on how to like pick a tool, pick a task, and then pick a timeline or something. So there's some fun stuff thrown into here that'll just make it interesting. At times we do get serious too, though. I just want to, because Lower Decks has its moments of like being really goofy, but then actually being like, real life serious stuff, right? We put in some great. Well, I don't know if it's great. We put in some advice. We'll leave it up to the fans to decide if it's great or not. As to like, what do you do if your senior officers die, or a member of your crew dies? Like, how does that impact the crew, right? Do you go see counselors? Is there PTSD? Like, how do you because traveling through space and exploring space is dangerous, and like Lower Decks takes a very kind of comedic view to it, whereas like the other shows might be much more serious, right? Because obviously this is a big deal, but Lower Decks tends to have that kind of like goofy angle to it, like where that one guy ascends to the Great Koala in space, and it's like, well, yeah, sure, he died, but it's also kind of funny because he's going to go see the Great Space Koala. But even Shax, right? Shax dies at the end of season 1. Spoiler alert. But then he comes back, and they don't really explain why he came back or how he came back. So we totally took that and said, okay, look, here's some advice about what happens if a character dies. How does that have an impact on the crew and potentially your character? But also, this character died, and then they came back. How do they come back? Here's a random table. Roll for a random reason that they came back, or maybe just make up your own if you want. So we had some fun with that. We also put in some, like gaming advice that me personally haven't really seen much in other RPGs, as to where, especially narrativistic RPGs, where like, what if you're a player and you want your character to die? What if you're ready to change characters and you want to do something different, or you're tired of the game and you want a graceful way out, or you want a dramatic way out? How do you go about talking to your game master about wanting to kill your character in a memorable way within the game context, other than like, I'm out of hit points and now I'm dead, or I'm out of stress and now I'm dead, or whatever? Like, what's a cool dramatic way to do that? So we put in some advice about that, which is a little bit serious, but also just hopefully just useful gaming advice. Again, because like I can remember doing that in a few games and not really having any guideposts, right? It was just me talking to the game master and saying, what, I'm kind of burned out on this character. I like the game, I like the campaign, but I'm kind of burned out with this character. Can I do something different? And let's come up with a cool way to write out my character. And does he or she go off and to some other thing and just says goodbye, or can we like craft some sort of cool like sacrificial moment where they do something cool and heroic, but they die, or maybe they fail, or whatever? Like, there's lots of ways you can play with that. And I think Star Trek Adventures, the game, but also Star Trek just as a storytelling device, you see that a lot, right? Where characters do die dramatically, and then either come back like Shax, or they just don't come back, but they've given their life for a good reason. I'm thinking of like Spock in Star Trek Two, and of course Data in Nemesis. Right, you can have a meaningful death, and within a game context, and still make it a good, fulfilling, game experience. So we put in some advice like that too, I think, which I think might hopefully will surprise some folks in a good way, right? That we're adding that different nuances of role playing to that. And on a related note, we do also have an extensive discussion on how to tell Star Trek stories, not just in the kind of like broad comedic sense of Lower Decks, but just in general. And this is kind of building on the advice that we put into the Game Master Guide a couple of years ago. And one of the things that Michael DeSmuth wrote that section, I encouraged him, like, just encourage people to really lean into the tropes, like understand the tropes of what makes a good science fiction story and what makes a good Star Trek story, and then give them advice on like how to take those tropes and twist them or combine them in different ways, so that you're not being you're not telling a stereotypical story, but you're telling something fresh and new, because you're taking the same tropes that we've seen a million times, but you're adding a twist to them, or you're adding something new to them, or you're combining them into slightly different ways to tell something fresh and different. So hopefully that advice will be useful too to some folks out there, because I know there's always new gamers coming into the game, right? New gamers and new players, and they're always looking for more advice because they don't want to do it wrong. And we're really trying to encourage them that there really is no wrong way to do it. It's just whatever works for you and your group. And oh, by the way, here's a whole bunch of tools that you can choose to use or not use. So ultimately, we just added a whole bunch more tools to your toolbox, and hopefully you all have fun with it.
One thing you said that I don't want viewers to not know about. I know currently right now there's some small digital releases to help promote the book. There's I believe there's a character guide, not character guide. If you want to look at the character templates like you've done for Discovery, they're available, and I think a small adventure. Am I correct about that?
Yep. Yeah, so we have in addition to the campaign guide, which will be out in pre-order for June, and then the book will be out in August. We have 4 digital releases that are in the works. 2 of them came out when the press release came out. So we've got the season 1 crew pack, which has all the main characters, some supporting characters, and the Cerritos in it. So that's kind of the first crew pack that's really focused on season 1. And then we have a standalone adventure called Lurkers, which is written by Christopher Bennett, one of the key Star Trek novelists out there. He's becoming a very well-known science fiction author in his own right. In fact, I think I just read on his blog post that he got a new story into the latest issue of Analog, and it was his first story in Analog where they commissioned the cover. So like, it's a big deal if you get it's a big deal to get a story into Analog in the first place, but to be like the lead story that gets the cover artwork is always a special deal. So Christopher Bennett has been just moving up in his career over the years, which is great. He's written a bunch of great Star Trek novels. He's a friend of mine. He's great. He's been gracious enough to write a ton of stuff for us, especially standalone adventures. And so he wrote a great standalone adventure in the Lower Decks tone and spirit that is focused, and this isn't going to spoil it because it's in the copy text. It's about the crew going to a planet that has intercepted Federation Starfleet communiques, and think that's how the world. So they're like, it's almost like kind of like Galaxy Quest in a sense, where they've built their whole civilization around what they think Starfleet is, and so there's a whole bunch of references to like conventions and characters and stuff like that. So if you're a Star Trek fan and you've done the con experience, you're going to eat up this standalone adventure because it's all relevant. And because Christopher and I have gone to the Shore Leave convention a lot over the years in Maryland, there's a lot of specific references to that convention dropped into the adventure as well. So if you've gone to Shore Leave a bunch of times, or even once, you'll see some of those references in the adventure, which is great because it was just kind of like bringing it all full circle. So we got the standalone adventure, we got a season 1 crew pack, we have a season 2 crew pack coming out before the book releases, and then we also have a set of free mission briefs that'll be out I think in May or June. I don't remember which one. So we got those 4 digital packs, and then the campaign guide, and then sometime this fall, once we get around to finishing it, we'll do a season 3 kind of supplement as well that does a full focus on season 3, and then we can carry that forward, because it'll probably be a while before we do another Lower Decks book. Like I want to do another Lower Decks book, and knock on wood, this one does well enough to warrant it. But like, we already know that season 4 is coming out this year, and we also already know that they've announced season 5 will be out next year, right? So knowing that there's going to be at least 5 seasons of this, it makes sense for us to wait a little bit for that next book, because we don't want to do it, too early, because then it's just not going to be enough new content. But if we wait a little bit, then we can actually make it even more comprehensive than what we'll be getting here. And so that'll be done. Hopefully we'll still have the license at that point. Knock on wood. Anything can change, but all things being equal, we got a bunch of digital releases coming out, and then the book in June for pre-order, and then August is the expected release for it.
Mm. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the new Lower Decks book.
Yeah.
And so these digital releases, I'll put a link in the description below for anyone who wants to find out more about it. So yes, viewers out there, thank you for checking us out. Stay safe out there and live long and prosper.
All right, be safe, be well, everybody. Take care. Manny, thank you as always for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. Love talking to you. I can't wait to talk to you again. So take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Take care, everyone.